Picture the icy skies above a ravaged Europe, where death fell from the heavens above and compassion was but a distant memory. It is December 20th, 1943, and Christmas is just around the corner when a young American pilot named Charlie Brown is set to face the ultimate challenge, not merely in his aviation prowess, but in the very fabric of the human spirit. This is the story of an extraordinary meeting between sworn enemies, an act of chivalry in the midst of the maelstrom of World War II, where a German ace chose honor over victory. Let's go back to the beginning, to the men who would become unlikely brothers in arms. Charles L. Brown, or Charlie as everyone called him, was a fresh-faced 21-year-old from Weston, West Virginia. Born in 1922, he grew up in the rolling hills of Appalachia, far from the thunder of anti-aircraft guns. After high school, Charlie joined the Army Air Corps, drawn by the romance of flight and the call to defend his country. By 1943, he found himself stationed at RAF Kimbolton in England, part of the 379th Bombardment Group, piloting the mighty B-17 Flying Fortress. These beasts of the sky, with their 4 engines and bristling guns, were the backbone of the Allied bombing campaign against Nazi Germany. But flying them was no picnic. Missions were grueling, with freezing temperatures, flak bursts that could shred metal like paper, and swarms of enemy fighters hungry for kills. Charlie's crew was a tight-knit band of brothers, each with their own stories.
There was co-pilot Spencer Pinky Luke, navigator Al Doc Zadok, and bombardier Robert Andy Andrews up front. In the waist, gunners like Alex Russian Yelesenko and Lloyd Jennings scanned the skies.
Sam Blackie Blackford manned the ball turret below, while Bertrand Frenchy Coulombe handled the top turret. Richard Dick Petchout operated the radio, and at the tail, Hugh Eckie Eckenrode kept watch from the most isolated spot. Their plane, affectionately dubbed Ye Olde Pub, was a B-17F with serial number 42 to 3167, a flying pub that carried hopes, fears, and the weight of the war on its wings. On the other side of the line stood Franz Stigler, a 28-year-old Bavarian from Regensburg.
Born in 1915, Franz was no rookie.
He'd started as a Lufthansa airline pilot before the war pulled him into the Luftwaffe. By 1943, he was a seasoned ace with Jagdgeschwader 27, or JG-27, racking up 27 confirmed victories in his Messerschmitt Bf-109. Franz had seen the horrors of combat, from the deserts of North Africa to the icy fronts of Europe. He flew with a code of honor instilled by his commander, Gustav Rodel, who once warned, "If I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." This ethos would soon be put to the test. The stage was set on that fateful morning. Charlie and his crew boarded Ye Olde Pub for their first combat mission together, a daylight raid on the Focke-Wulf aircraft factory in Bremen, Germany. Over 500 B-17s and B-24s thundered into the sky, escorted by fighters, but the target was heavily defended. More than 250 flak guns ringed the city, and Luftwaffe fighters lurked nearby. As the formation approached at 27,300 feet, the temperature plummeted to minus 76 degrees Fahrenheit. The bomb run lasted a tense 10 minutes, straight and level, making them sitting ducks for the anti-aircraft fire below. Flak exploded around them like deadly fireworks. Shrapnel tore through the nose, shattering the plexiglass and knocking out the number 2 engine completely. Number 4 sputtered, its propeller windmilling uselessly. Oxygen lines froze, hydraulics failed, and the electrical systems flickered. But they dropped their bombs on target and turned for home, or so they hoped. Straggling behind the formation, Ye Olde Pub became an easy mark for the German fighters. Over a dozen Bf-109s and FW-190s pounced, their cannons blazing. The attack was relentless. Cannon shells ripped into the tail, decapitating Eckenrode in a horrific instant. Yelesenko took a hit to the leg, blood soaking his flight suit. Blackford's feet froze in the sub-zero cold as he spun in his turret. Petchout was struck in the eye, and Charlie himself felt a sharp pain in his shoulder from shrapnel. Guns jammed from the cold, leaving only a few operational. Morphine syrettes were frozen solid, useless for the wounded. The crew debated bailing out over enemy territory, but with Yelesenko unable to jump, they stuck together, limping through the clouds at low altitude, engines failing, the plane barely holding together. Meanwhile, on the ground at a nearby German airfield, Franz Stigler was refueling his Bf-109 after a routine patrol. A mechanic was digging out a lodged American .50 caliber bullet from his radiator when a low-flying shadow caught his eye. It was the battered B-17, engine smoking, holes gaping like wounds. Stigler scrambled into his cockpit, guns armed, ready for an easy kill that could earn him the coveted Knight's Cross. Just one more victory needed. He lifted off, closing in on the intruder. But as he pulled alongside, what he saw through those ragged holes changed everything. Wounded men tending to each other, fear etched on young faces, a plane that was already defeated. In that moment, the war's machinery ground to a halt, and humanity took over. What would Stigler do next? Narrator's voice returns, soft but steady, as the music shifts to a tense, building underscore. Archival clips show a lone B-17 trailing smoke, then cut to a sleek Bf-109 climbing into the gray sky. Franz Stigler eased back on the throttle, sliding his Messerschmitt into position just off the B-17's left wing. The American bomber looked like it had been chewed up and spat out. Ragged holes punched through the fuselage, the tail half gone, one engine feathered and silent.
Through the gaping wounds in the metal, Franz could see straight into the cockpit and the compartments beyond.
Young faces stared back, some bloodied, some dazed, others desperately tending to the wounded. One man slumped over a gun mount, lifeless. The tail gunner was gone, decapitated, Franz would later learn.
This wasn't a fight anymore.
This was mercy's edge. He lined up his guns instinctively, finger hovering near the trigger. One clean burst, and the kill would be his. The Knight's Cross, the Iron Cross with swords, oak leaves and diamonds that every fighter pilot dreamed of, was within reach. Bombers counted triple. This straggler would push him over the line. Glory, promotion, the respect of his squadron. All of it waited. But something stopped him cold. The words of his old commander, Gustav Rodel, echoed in his mind like a warning shot. If I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself. Franz had lived by that code through North Africa, through the dogfights over the desert, through every bailout he'd survived. And now, looking at this shattered fortress, he saw exactly that. Men already fallen, exposed, helpless, drifting toward death. Shooting them down would be no different from machine gunning parachutes. It would cross a line he refused to cross. He lowered his nose slightly, pulled closer. No firing. Instead, he rocked his wings gently, the universal signal, follow me. He pointed toward the ground, gesturing for them to land in Germany. Hospitals waited there, surgeons, warmth. Charlie Brown, fighting to keep the controls steady through pain and shock, shook his head. He didn't understand, or perhaps he did and refused.
Home was England, across the sea.
Anything else meant captivity, or worse.
Franz tried again.
He flew wingtip to wingtip, shielding the bomber from the flak batteries below. German gunners tracked them, barrels swinging, but with a Luftwaffe fighter glued to the American side, no one dared fire. For miles, Franz stayed there, escorting an enemy he could have destroyed in seconds.
The two planes moved in eerie silence, engines droning, the wind howling through the holes in the B-17 like a mournful chorus.
Finally, the coast appeared below, then the gray expanse of the North Sea. Franz made one last attempt. He pointed north toward Sweden, neutral ground, just 30 minutes away.
Doctors, safety, no prison camp.
Brown kept his heading west, stubborn or simply too far gone to change course. Charlie, still bleeding from his shoulder wound, glanced at the German fighter so close he could see the pilot's face.
Fear gripped him.
He ordered Frenchy Coulomb back into the top turret. The twin .50 calibers swung toward the Bf-109, though the guns were frozen solid, useless. Franz saw the barrels tracking him.
He understood.
No more gestures.
No more pleading.
He raised his hand in a crisp salute, respect, farewell, perhaps even apology. Then he banked sharply left, peeling away toward home. He watched the battered fortress shrink against the horizon, certain it would never make the crossing. The North Sea was unforgiving. Cold water claimed many stragglers that winter. Franz landed quietly, said nothing to his ground crew. To speak of it would mean court-martial, maybe a firing squad.
He buried the memory deep, carried it alone through the rest of the war, through jet fighters, through defeat, through the long years after.
But across the water, something impossible was happening. Showing the B-17 fighting through clouds, engines coughing, crew huddled together. Charlie Brown wrestled the yoke, blood soaking his flight suit.
The instruments lied. The compass spun lazily.
One engine quit entirely, another barely turning.
Altitude bled away, 8,000 feet, 6,000, lower still.
The crew passed morphine, wrapped wounds, prayed. They talked about home, about Christmas that might never come. Against every odds, Ye Olde Pub clawed its way across 250 miles of freezing ocean. Land appeared, England's coast, blessed and blurry. Charlie lined up for a field near RAF Seething, wheels down on a runway meant for newer groups. The bomber touched earth, skidded, stopped.
Medics rushed in.
The crew survived. Every man who could still breathe made it. But the story they told, of the German fighter that refused to fire, was met with silence.
Classified. Top secret. No medals, no mentions.
The brass feared it might soften hearts toward the enemy. Charlie kept quiet for decades. Until one day, 40 years later, he decided to find the man who had looked him in the eye and chosen mercy. What happened when two old pilots finally met again? The years rolled on like thunder, fading into memory. Charlie Brown returned to the States after the war, rose through the ranks to lieutenant colonel, served in Korea, built a life, raised a family. But that December day in 1943 never fully left him. The German fighter pilot who saluted instead of firing, he became a quiet ghost in Charlie's mind.
Who was he? Why the mercy?
In 1986, at a gathering of the Eagles reunion at Maxwell Air Force Base, someone asked Charlie about his most memorable mission. The story spilled out for the first time in decades. That question lit a spark. He had to know.
Charlie started searching.
He wrote letters to the Air Force, to archives, to German aviation groups.
Nothing. For years of dead ends.
Then, in 1989, he placed a notice in a newsletter for former Luftwaffe pilots, looking for the German fighter pilot who escorted a damaged B-17 out of Germany on December 20, 1943. Months later, a reply arrived from Vancouver, Canada. The letter was simple, direct: I was the one. Franz Stigler, now in his 70s, had emigrated to Canada in 1953, worked in the aviation industry, raised a family of his own. He'd carried the secret too, never told a soul during the war, for fear of execution. When he read Charlie's ad, everything came rushing back: the crippled fortress, the wounded crew, the salute over the North Sea. He wrote back, describing details only the real pilot would know: the damage to the tail, the feathered engines, the exact gestures. Charlie knew.
This was him. They spoke by phone first. Voices cracked with emotion across the Atlantic. Then came the plan, a face-to-face meeting.
On June 21, 1990, in Seattle, Washington, the two men met for the first time since that frozen sky 47 years earlier. A friend of Charlie's brought a video camera. The footage survives. Raw, unscripted, heartbreakingly human. Charlie, tall and steady, walks toward Franz. Franz, shorter, silver-haired, opens his arms. They embrace like long-lost brothers.
Tears stream down both faces.
Franz pulls back, looks Charlie in the eyes and says, his German accent thick with feeling, "I love you, Charlie." Charlie replies simply, "I love you too, Franz." They laugh through the sobs, clap each other on the back, marvel at the impossible circle life had drawn. They talked for hours. Franz explained his decision: the code from Gustav Rodel, the sight of helpless men in a dying plane, the refusal to become a murderer. Charlie shared how the crew survived, how the incident was buried under classification, how he'd searched for decades. They pored over photos: Ye Olde Pub's wreckage, Franz's Bf-109, crew reunions.
Franz met Charlie's family. Charlie learned about Franz's life after the war.
The friendship deepened quickly. They visited each other often. Vancouver, Seattle reunions across the US and Canada. Franz became a guest of honor at Charlie's crew gatherings. He met the surviving men he'd spared: Pinky Luke, Al Sadek, the others. Their children and grandchildren came too. Generations that existed because of one man's choice not to pull the trigger. Franz would look at them and say quietly, "This is why." They spoke together at air shows, military events, sharing the story of mercy over victory.
No bitterness, only gratitude.
Franz never regretted it. Charlie never stopped thanking him. The bond held strong until the end. In March 2008, Franz Stigler passed away in Canada at age 92. Charlie Brown died just 6 months later, in November 2008, at 86. They left this world close as ever. Two pilots who, in the cruelest of wars, found something higher than orders or medals: humanity. Their story lives on, a quiet beacon in the storm of history. In a time when enemies were faceless, two men saw each other's faces and chose life.